To start us off today, if climate change happens fast enough, we may all be scrambling to migrate up north. Well, maybe not climate change, but what? Maybe if we adopt advanced digital technologies fast enough, we may all be scrambling to migrate up north. Maybe we'll hear all the answers to this quiz equivocation and questioning from our first roundtable discussion, which is called Migration and Inclusive Cities. How can social and technological infrastructure shape the experience of integration? The discussion will be chaired by Sandeep Agarwal. Sandeep joins us from University of Alberta, where he is the Associate Dean in the Faculty of Graduate Studies and Research, and the Professor in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. He is also University of Alberta Institutional Lead and Core Lead Place and Infrastructure Theme for Bridging Divides. Over to you, Sandeep.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the conference, and welcome to this roundtable, which is about migration and inclusive cities. So my name is Sandeep Agarwal, as Martha mentioned, and the co-chair, who's back here, Jeremy Mulho. He's a senior research associate here at TMU, and he will manage the chat and sort of see the discussions and questions that are arising from the virtual medium. So you have seen sort of the longer version and the bios of our esteemed panelists in the conference brochure, but I'll keep the introductions fairly short. So right next to me is Gil Panalosa. He's the founder and chair of the Canadian nonprofit organization 880 Cities and the founder of Cities for Everyone. Now, I may take away your thunder for a second, but you can elaborate on this. So 880 Cities is about creating cities for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old and everybody in between, but you can again expand when it comes to it. Next to Gil is Jeffrey Rockwell, a colleague of mine at the University of Alberta, and he's a professor of philosophy and digital humanities, a Canada CIFAR AI chair, and a fellow of the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. And next to Jeffrey is Kathy Liu. Kathy is a professor and chair of the public management and policy at Georgia State University in the US. Her research works have focused on immigrant employment, gig work, and we'll maybe elaborate on that, Kathy, when it comes to your turn, immigrant entrepreneurship and policies. Next to Kathy is Zushi Zhuang. She's a professor of urban planning here at TMU, academic director of the TMU Center for Immigration and Settlement, and she focuses on ethnic retailing, entrepreneurship, placemaking, and suburban retrofitting. So as you can see, we have experts in cities and AI and migration and settlement on the panel. Just a quick reminder, this is a slightly longer session, so it's spanning an hour, 45 minutes, but it gives us a generous time frame to have a more insightful and fulsome discussion. And I've been advised that academics like to talk, and we have 3 of them here. So yeah, we should be all fine. All right, so turning to the panel topic, just for a second, again, the details are in your brochure, but I wanted to set the stage for a second. So we will discuss what social and technological infrastructure impacts newcomers integration in Canadian and American cities. And we will include large cities and small cities and the cities and villages and of all different sizes across Canada and beyond. And we will spend a little bit more time on small cities and villages where newcomers tend not to settle, but we'll get to that in our discussion. Next thing I want to do is, and again, this may not be the best place to take this poll, but I want to do it. so I will do it. So let me pose this question to you. Please raise your hand if you live in a small community. Let's say a community of less than 100,000. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh gosh, so more than what I expected. But anyways, you can see out of the audience, 10 are in small cities. So just give you a few figures. In 2021, when the last census was done, over 9 out of 10 recent immigrants lived in one of Canada's 41 census metropolitan areas, which are large urban centers with over 100,000 people living in them. And as has been the trend for the last 50 years, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver combined continue to welcome more than 50% of most recent immigrants. So as you can see, most of the immigrants, newcomers coming to Canada, settle in large cities or let's say some medium cities. So with that, I wanted to start off our conversation and perhaps with a more general question, and I'll pose this question to Gil, and then I will go around the panel. So what are the key social and or technological infrastructure newcomers need at the time of their arrival? And let's say they have lived in the country for 5 years or so.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I think that technology can play an important role, not only at the time of arrival, but even before arrival. But I think that it's very, very important that Canada fixes the immigration system, because there is a myth that Canada is world leader in immigration. And that is almost like in the land, the one-eyed person is king in the land of the blind. The reality is that our immigration system is pretty mediocre. I've been lucky to have worked in over 350 cities in all continents. And I've seen a lot of issues around immigration. 2 years ago, I ran for mayor of Toronto. And in 100 days, I got 100,000 votes. And one of my lessons was meeting immigrants all over the city that were completely frustrated. I've met so many people cleaning floors when they had 2 master's degrees. And they said, well, I don't care about cleaning floors for 6 months, but I've been doing it for 6 years. And now I don't care. I'm going to do it the rest of my life, but I want a good life for my children. I said, what do you mean? You're only 40. Why are you giving up for the rest of your life and now your focus is on the children? The reality is that Canada, we're having a lot of immigrants because any country, any of the top 20 countries in the world, there is such a lack of equity around the world that any of the top 20 countries that opens the doors will get as many millions as they want. So we need to be, Canada, very, very, very responsible on how we deal with immigration, because we cannot have people, because it's a bad system. And it could be win-win-win system. For example, the immigrants, we come at a huge cost. We leave our families, our friends, everything with the illusion of Canada. And we come here and we hit a wall. And then it's bad for everybody. It's bad for the emerging countries because Canada is sucking up the best people, the cream of the crop. The best nurses, the best teachers, the best engineers, the best musicians, the best community organizers, the best. It's bad for the immigrants because they hit a wall and then they end up cleaning floors or doing hamburgers. And it's bad for Canada because we need teachers, but they are flipping hamburgers. We need nurses, but they are driving Ubers. So from the start, we need to clarify. So if we don't clarify now, it doesn't matter how much technology we have, it's not going to improve. But we have such magnificent opportunity because we can bring people whatever we need. If we need people to clean floors, then let's bring people who want to come and clean floors. If we want people to flip hamburgers, let's bring people. If we say we want people of between 170 and 180 height that want to flip hamburgers and that have brown eyes, we'll get 1,000 people lining up. I mean, that is a huge opportunity, but also, so then we need to be responsible with that. So whenever we decide what kind of people are coming the following year, then technology can be a huge asset, because then we need to have a very clear path. If you're a nurse and you come, okay, you gotta take a 3-month course and then take a test. If you pass the test, you jump over Canadian experience. Or you're a carpenter, you gotta go to one of the colleges and do this. If you're in every profession, there should be a very clear path of integration. It's so simple, but incredibly, it doesn't exist. So people spend years and years and years, and we have a huge frustrated, especially first generation of immigrants all across Canada. So technology could help so that once people decide they're gonna come, they could learn the path, they could start learning for the test. They also could learn about housing and living and conditions and the weather, and they could learn about experiences. Then technology could play an amazing role. But my message is that we need to have much more clarity on the what. What do we need? Where do we need? How do we need? And then technology can implement, especially, for example, for language. Language is, I think, by far the #1 barrier. So if we could also help even before people come to learn, that would be amazing. Also interconnecting people from similar situations to share stories so that people can adapt positive experience and avoid negative experience. So I think that in general, I think that's a little bit how technology, but my main message with these initial questions is that if we don't have clarity on what is it that we want, then we don't, of course, why doesn't it work? Because there are huge barriers and lots of people that don't want it to work. The unions don't want it to work, because if there's a scarcity of teachers, then the teachers' union becomes powerful. If there's a lot of teachers, then they're not as powerful. And similar with the nurses and the electricians and the carpenters or whatever. Also, there are some politicians that they listen too much to the NIMBYs on the housing issue that we'll talk later on. So then they said, oh, I want to get these votes from the NIMBYs, so then I don't want the immigrants here. So things do not work. It's not necessarily because people have not been enlightened on what needs to be done. No, they know what needs to be done, but it seems to have some benefits of not making it work. So my message is, let's make it work. Let's clarify the what, let's clarify the how, and then technology could be amazing at making life a lot easier for immigrants.
Excellent start, Gil. So maybe something on technology side, Jeffrey, if you want to chime in.
Well, sure. I was actually going to say something that's not so much about technology, but about the social dimension of it, which is, I think we've heard in previous panels about the importance of good information. And I just want to add to that the importance of trusted information. I mean, we live in communities of abundant, excessive information. And I think we often learn, in some sense, the tacit literacies about what to listen to, what not to listen to, how to get trusted information, how to double check that phone call is really from your bank, and no, you have not just bought an estate in Florida or something like that. So I think it's providing newcomers with the channels, the venues for trust and the systems of trust, so that they can get at information which is useful to them. And related to that is, I think, the problem of the tacit knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge you need to have in order to operate in a sort of mixed technological society. You know, I think of just when I was coming here, I phoned my usual taxi company, and they've now switched to voice recognition. So I'm sitting there trying to give my address, and my address, the actual number of my house is 10008. And that just flummoxed the voice recognition, because, you know, like most of this AI is is smart, but not that smart. And so you have to know how to adapt to, you have to know all the little tricks, the digital literacy. In my case, I just went to a different taxi company that happened to have bought data, and they knew exactly where I was calling from, and I didn't have to give it my. So how to use these voice systems as we see these new interfaces coming in, and how to use ones that are trained on native data and are, don't adapt well to people who are not native speakers. And native speakers aren't used to the variety of technologies. Newcomers are not used to the variety of things that can go wrong and don't have that tacit knowledge. So I think it's, it's one thing very important to help people translate their degrees and their professional knowledge, but we also have to give them the tacit knowledge. So, and I'll stop there.
Jeff, Kathy, anything from the American perspective, maybe?
Thanks, Sandeep. Good morning, everyone. It's a lot of pressure to be representing the U.S. here, but I'll just share my perspective. I think for newcomers, when they come to a new country, wherever that is, their needs are really very varied, right? Kind of starting, I would say, the first thing when they settle is housing, right? Everybody who come to a new country need to decide where to live, how do they live, and usually the next thing up, if they have kids, if they have family, is about education, right? Where can they go to school? Where can they find a school that can take their children? And usually, together, along those lines, employment, right? Jobs, where do they work? And connecting the housing to jobs also is a very essential thing, which is transportation, right? How do you get from jobs, your housing to jobs? Is there public transportation access? Can you ever buy a car or rent a car? And also, can you get a driver's license in the US case? So I think it can be an overwhelming task for a newcomer to be in a new country, facing all these different things that they need to deal with. And I haven't mentioned yet all the services that need to access, right? All the different kind of paperwork they need to complete. So I think where technology in this current world can help is to better bridge and connect information to the newcomers. Because I think the reality is a lot of information exists. But for a newcomer, it might be very hard to navigate that different systems, right? Sometimes not in your native language, and to figure out where to find that information. And also, it usually means that there's not one place that you can find all the information. You need to go to different websites, you need to talk to different people, go to different offices in order to get all the information together. So I think that's where technology can really help. There are already some existing, I think, practices out there where it can easily translate the information to various, say in English, to different languages, which will be really helpful. Some informal channels, I think, already exist among immigrant communities themselves. I think in different groups, there are various kind of information forums or informal channels. So I think from the more kind of service delivery perspective, where do we put the more public official information and connect those to the informal networks that already exist, be it online forums or radios, or newspapers in other languages. So I think being able to connect those channels and clear those barriers will be really helpful to really kind of get to the information to the newcomers as they come in.
Thank you, Kathy. Zushi.
Thank you so much to all my colleagues here. And I absolutely agree with you about how technology can play a role in shaping immigrants, newcomers, experiences, but also like what other areas we should pay more attention to, because considering the unique challenges. And I just want to say, just using my own life experiences as an example, I arrived to Canada more than 20 years ago. And at that time, we did not, internet did not have that much of popularity. and I can only rely on a phone book with all the written telephone numbers to reach out to my friends and my landlords, et cetera, right? And my employers, we didn't even have a cell phone, a smartphone at that time. So if I lost my phone book and I lost all my connections, so to speak, and technology does play a significant role in shaping how we interact with others and how we build our own world and build our life as newcomers in the last 2 decades, especially with the advancement of technology. And I'm hosting a PhD student from Sydney, Australia. She just arrived this week. And I was thinking like, oh, as a newcomer, I will try to support her as much as possible, of course. And as I said to her, Canada is cold, but people are not. People here are not cold. So we try to support her. But she has already done her research. And through Google Maps and through connection with people here, she knows like IKEA is around the corner. If she needs new bedding, kitchenware, she can go there. And she knows how to open a bank account and everything. Okay, so, but all in all, technology does really help us to settle. But the thing is, after that, after this like first year of the arrival with the excitement, with some of the challenges, of course, looking for housing, employment opportunities, education, are we going to stay here in this country? How do we retain these global talents? How do we provide a very welcoming and inviting environment for these families of newcomers? So what can we do with the social infrastructure, with the provision of social infrastructure, technological advancement, or even physical infrastructure? Because staying in Canada is different from your first arrival. We're talking about your social inclusion, economic inclusion, political inclusion, participating in the civic life, and also the physical spatial inclusion as well, right? How do you enjoy the city life and enjoy and participate in civic life? How do we raise a family here? How do we advance our career and make connection with the community here? And also develop this kind of so-called sense of belonging. And are we going to stay? So how can technology, how can social infrastructure support these settlement integration experiences? And I'm also using another example. Our students are very active in the planning school. They organize this kind of like freshman orientation. Normally they organize this kind of like tour to the Center Island to spend a night on the island, to have the campfire, etc. One student told me, just graduated from high school and coming to our first year in our university. She told me, I was born here. I was raised here in Toronto, but I have never been to the Center Island. Why? I live in Scarborough. My parents are immigrants. They have to struggle in multiple jobs on a daily basis. And coming to downtown Toronto, I don't really have that privilege. I need to pay, first of all, pay the expensive TTC fees, and then pay the ferry fees, and then the food and everything on the island is super expensive. So it really kind of like costs a fortune for a high school student to explore the city. Even though she was born here, she was raised here, and it seems like she never stepped out of Scarborough, the east end suburb of Toronto. So that is really striking to me when I hear that. And when the city of Toronto was doing the Center Island master plan consultation, they are trying to engage immigrant communities to collect their perspectives and understanding more about their lived experiences. And I talked to them about this story. I said, like, how can we actually develop better infrastructure from transportation to housing to services, and to support our newcomers and immigrants and even the second generation, the third generation, the generations to come? How can we actually do a better job? And then that goes to my next point. I'm going to stop Santip in a minute. It's about geography. It's about these place-based approaches. We talk about large cities, smaller cities. We talk about suburbs, the peripheries, and the outskirts of the city. Those are the areas, if we want to invest in terms of the development of technology, the development of physical infrastructure, housing, transportation, or social infrastructure to support newcomers and immigrants and racialized communities and equity-seeking groups. Focus on those areas, the peripheries, the outskirts of our cities, because they are the most underdeveloped areas, and there's a lack of infrastructure support in those places, but we will elaborate a bit more later.
Thank you. Thank you, Zushi. I really like that anecdote that you elaborated. So with that, I just wanted to now sort of build on the strengths of our panelists, and I'll start off with Jeffrey, who is the guru of AI. So yeah, this question is for you. We had a lot of discussions on AI yesterday, so you probably have a lot to say, I hope. But this is about how is artificial intelligence being used to integrate newcomers? And then if you think about AI or any other technological infrastructure, does that mean that people, newcomers, people can live anywhere in Canada, or do they have to be in cities?
Well, first of all, I'm not the guru of AI, and you know, and it's a moving target. I think we all need to be modest when we talk about AI. Though you know, once I've had a beer, I can usually predict exactly what's going to happen. I want to begin by saying, pointing out that there are some systems that have AI built into them that we use every day. And you know, just a Google search or a DuckDuckGo search, you're using systems that have the constantly modified and retrained systems that are changing. You probably all noticed that the Google search from 10 years ago is very different from what you're getting right now. Translation. The translation tools got really smart all of a sudden when they started using large amounts of data. And then they got doubly smart. You could, you know, if any of you have like traveled somewhere, you can hold up your camera and it'll translate signs for you and so on like that. And I think these are tools that are used extensively to especially people who don't have the grasp of English that we might have, or French. Maps. There's a lot of intelligence built into our map systems. And there's a lot of opportunity to actually layer more intelligence onto the map. You can build layers on top of Google Maps and share them with people that might sort of provide community-specific orientation and so on like that. There's a lot of work being put into trying to build systems that will do employment matching. We've heard about how people are overrun by applications, and we've heard about the dangers of that. Some of you may have read about how Amazon actually discontinued a system when they discovered that their system, because it was trained on historic data, was actually biased against women and was rejecting women based often on sort of tacit or correlations. And so there's a lot of dangers. There's a lot of dangers with employment systems, but I think there are other things that are worth looking at. I know the Canadian government is actually looking at a project out of Stanford called GeoMatch that tries to match people with certain skill, newcomers with certain skills to certain communities. So you know, we don't have you know, Alberta is an example where we go through waves of all of a sudden we need lots of people in the trades. And then I had a cousin who actually trained as a welder, and then boom, there was no jobs for welders all of a sudden because some of the big plants closed down and so on like that. So trying to do more real-time matching, employment matching, I think is an opportunity. I don't think we're quite there yet. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the risks and dangers. And but I'm going to combine them with opportunities, because I think often, you know, like any coin, it has two sides. One of the things that's happening in the business world is these LLMs are actually reasonably not good, not very good, but they can program. If any of you have ChatGPT Plus, you can actually ask it. You can upload a spreadsheet and you can ask it to do data analysis. And it's not just that it gives you the code, it actually writes the code and then runs it. And then if something goes wrong, it'll try to sort of adapt and sort of go, you know, I don't have access to an NLP package for doing part of speech tagging. So I'm gonna go off and do something slightly, approach it a slightly different way. So this is being used in the business community. It's allowing consultants and certain types of businesses to create customized dashboards for much smaller organizations. It used to be that the sort of executive information system was something that only large companies could have, and only and only if they had a full stack of technology and programmers and so on like that. But now all of a sudden we're seeing these types of customized interfaces, dashboards, for lack of a better term, being adapted for smaller and smaller groups. And I think the time will come when we may actually, people will be able to create a dashboard. You know, I'm coming to St. Albert's, and I want to have together the information that I need to know about St. Albert's. Now that's the opportunity side. The risk side is that all of these things come with the need for more and more data. And I don't think we have really in place yet the sort of data protocols, especially, and I think we heard about this on the first day, you know, government will give grants to ISOs, but are these ISOs supported in developing the data and privacy protocols? Are they supported in building the security into the system? If they start gathering a lot of data, aggregating it, putting together these special information systems, will they also be able to ensure that this is not used to surveil the community or the people that they're serving? And you know, there've been cases of non-for-profits or charities that under duress end up selling their data. So, you know, there's a need for regulatory, for regulation. In fact, Bill C-27 is coming down and might help with some of this. This was mentioned yesterday, but it just has to be emphasized over and over again. Machine learning systems are trained on masses of data. The masses of data are historic and they're biased. They come from, you know, they're biased linguistically. They tend to come from people who did stuff, and historic data is then going to reproduce or encode and inscribe, has the potential to inscribe injustices in some sense and make them invisible. So you don't even know that the system is biased in a way that you might know with a different type of process. So we have to be very careful about ensuring that any system is being tested for bias and being regularly tested, because the other thing is you have change, you know, a system that might deliver very useful inferences now. 5 years from now, language has changed, the people coming in have changed, all sorts of things have changed, and the data sets need to be updated. I'm fascinated, as I said earlier, by the interfaces, and the opportunities are actually the failures of interfaces. I bet all of you have experimented with one of these sort of speaker systems at home, Alexa or Siri, and you've all had all sorts of amusing times sort of asking Alexa to crack jokes or asking it things and it not giving you the right answer and something like that. But what happens when these interfaces become mandatory? You have no choice but to use a voice interface. And what happens, which is likely, almost every technology that comes in, it's never perfect. We end up having to learn to accommodate ourselves to the system. We have to adapt to learning how to speak for a voice recognition system, you know, asking the people in your house to shut up so that you can actually get the system to recognize your address and stuff like that. So how are we going to help newcomers adapt to second-rate, half-baked, poorly designed interfaces, which is going to be the reality for a lot of what we're dealing with, and is going to be teaching a certain amount of literacy, how to get alternatives and so on. A big area, which I'm not going to talk about, we have people who know much more than I do, is of course employment. I do want to say, though, as William Gibson put it, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. I'm not sure if I have the quote quite right, but in the 60s, when automation came in and people were very worried about employment, if you go back and read the Globe and Mail articles, they were very worried about employment, but worried about employment of certain people. And in fact, I found a Globe and Mail article that says, well, there's a whole mess of young women being thrown out of work who are in the typing pools, but they don't matter. And I kid you not. It's so, people will have, there will be the employment stress that we face, or that newcomers face, it won't be evenly distributed. And of course, the newcomers are the last people to be able to advocate or to be able to explain the stress and the disruption that they're facing. So I think we need to be very careful about that. And I think this is going to be an issue for smart cities, especially. There's going to be real opportunities and challenges. So I'll stop there. I've gone on too long as.
No, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So I was just eager to insert myself as someone who is not so good in technology anymore. Although I was hired as a GIS remote sensing faculty here at TMU, but I've become a dinosaur now and all of that. But recently, I experimented with Copilot. So this was a project that I was doing looking at privately sponsored refugees, and there were a bunch of interviews we had done. So Copilot is quite interesting. It can summarize everything, and it can, like there were 20 interviews, and it could take all of it, and it looked very, very good. But I had done the interviews myself, and there were things that the private sponsored refugees didn't want to say, or sort of skirting around the issue, was not captured by Copilot, which was very interesting for me as an academic. But Copilot did not pick that up because there was gestures, there were a lot of words used that, probably Copilot did not actually picked up on. So I just wanted to add that to what you said, Jeff.
And I don't think this is a problem of AI. It's partly also a problem of big data. When we have people analyzing data who are not content experts, they wouldn't know if it misleads them or draws inferences that are inappropriate. When we shift in our research practices from what I'm going to call close reading in the humanities to distant reading, all of a sudden, we don't even know what's in that data. We can't read it all, and we begin to have to trust these tools, and the tools are crude. They don't handle the nuances and so on like that. So I think, and it's very common. Some people will say, "Oh, it'll all come out with if you have so much data, it all comes out in the wash, and it doesn't matter if some of the inferences are wrong or something like that." But I don't think that's the case, and but we end up just depending on it, and we then get systems like we get immigration officers who are under pressure to handle a number of cases, are being given a system like Chinook that is actually helps them batch. It doesn't use AI. It helps them batch a number of 500 cases that seem to have the same sort of features, and just sort of batch approve or refuse or something like that. So we're all dealing with a sort of big data problem and the pressure to do more with less.
Thank you, Jeff. So my next question is actually going to go to Kathy. So as you know quite well, both in Canada and the US, the immigration levels have been on the rise. And especially if you look at the US, I mean, despite different policies of different administration, and again, I'm not going to invoke any name or party or courtroom drama, but but even all of that, the immigration levels have continued to increase in the US. So my question is it possible to continue the current immigration levels in the US and Canada, I'm going to say, so that it include rest of the panelists? And do we need a different infrastructure in the integration of newcomers in the long term?
Very tough question. I wish I have a crystal ball, but here's my thoughts on this. I think the immigrant level to any country is dependent on many different factors. And have to, as a side note, have to say that the scale of things we're talking about in the United States is quite larger, much larger than the scale we're talking about in Canada. I was just checking, fact checking, double checking the numbers. We're talking about 53 million immigrants in the US right now, which is even larger than the total population in Canada, as I have been learning in the past two days, is at 40 million. So it is a very large number, and also the channels, the ways, right, the different kind of status that people come into the United States is very diverse and it's very different, which all pose lots of kind of issues in terms of how do we integrate and how do we include the immigrant population into the US society. Right now, the immigrant level in terms of percentage of the population is at historical high in the US. We're talking about a little bit over 15%. And that for a long time, so even about 4 or 5 years ago, we're still below 15%, about 14.3, 4%. And that level was below kind of about 100 years ago, around 1900, 1890. At that time, immigrants to the US, that was about 14.5%. So we haven't really surpassed that level until this year, almost most recent years, where we reached 15%. So as you said, Sandeep, despite all the different policies at different levels, immigrant level continue to increase both in absolute numbers and in terms of relative shares of the total population in the United States. Now, so the flow of immigrants to any country is dependent on several factors. So first of all, it is about kind of on the international level, all the geopolitical events that are going on right now. Anytime there are conflicts, there are wars, and also environmental shocks, climate change. So all of these could cause displacement, could cause people to migrate to different countries. Another very important factor is demographic. What is the fertility rates? What's the demographic patterns and trends, both in the US and in immigrant sending countries? So for a long time, I know there are researchers who's really looking at fertility rates in Mexico, because that in a way could also affect immigration levels to the US. Another important factor is economic factors. The US has been attracting immigrants because its economy, despite COVID-19 and all these other shocks, has been growing at a very strong rate. And that also, the strength of the US dollars also mean that the earnings differential that you can potentially receive in the US is very much higher than what you will receive probably in the sending country. So that kind of an earnings differential also attract immigrants to come to US and some other countries. So these are some kind of a national level political, demographic, economic factors. Another thing we cannot ignore is policy. And that we're talking about policy both at the national level in terms of how at the federal level, how many immigrants each country wants to admit. And that depends on, how many refugees, right? How many kind of work visas, how many family reunion visas. So all these different channels together come up to a number that will determine how many people can come to a country. Lastly, the policy also at the state and local levels. And we know that in the US, what we call immigrant federalism is that there are these federal level policies, but each state and each locality and municipality can design and implement policies and different policies, a whole spectrum of policies ranging from really restrictive to quite welcoming, the sanctuary cities. So all these kind of local and state level policies would also determine how immigrants are received in different localities, and those kind of sentiments and public opinion would ultimately translate into, people's perception of whether they want to come to the US, and if they do, exactly to which places. So again, I think all these different things means that there's lots of uncertainties, right, in terms of where kind of geopolitically, internationally, where things will go, policy-wise, where things go, and also economically. Will the US economy continue to grow at the rate it's growing now? So I think all of that will determine what will be, and the demographic, as I already said, will determine how would the immigrant level be in the next few years and in the next few decades.
Yes.
That would group into the policy. Yes, yes.
The elephant in the room.
Yeah,
Right.
policy and politics.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, so same question, maybe Gil, to you about immigration levels.
Well, I think that there is no doubt that immigration is going to continue, and it's going to continue high. There are two simple factors. One is the population is aging everywhere. And in the developed countries, people are having fewer children. Like you need to have about 2.1 children per woman for the population not to grow, 2.1. The US is at 1.7, Canada is at 1.6. There are many other so-called developed countries at 1.4, 1. But even Mexico is below 2.1. Mexico is already at 1.8. So the population is decreasing. South Korea is at 0.8. I mean, South Korea is disappearing, and they are investing billions promoting people to have children, and they have not been able to make it successful. But anyway, US and Canada, the population is decreasing. And at the same time, the population is aging. So these two factors mean that you are going to need, that I think the population, the immigrants, are going to continue. I also think that, I mean, I love that this program of immigration and technology on how to improve, but also we need to solve some structural issues. Because, and I mean, when I became Canadian, I had to study a test too, and none of the questions said that you needed to be politically correct. It said that you need to be respectful. But actually, I think one of the big issues that we have with immigration is that we, in Canada, we think that is part of our culture, politically correct. So we don't say things. We never say that the emperor has no clothes. When the immigrants in Canada are from Europe, white, blue eyes, whatever, they're welcome. I mean, just now you're from Ukraine. The government came out and said, anyone from Ukraine that wants to come to Canada in the next 90 days or 6 months will give them permits automatically. I never have seen any such policy with Syria or with other countries that are also going through huge internal problems. So the issue is that there is a different treatment when the immigrants are white and blue-eyed and educated and healthy than when they are brown or black or so on. So that is a huge issue that we don't really talk about that very much, but it is very, very different. I mean, so how can technology help on this? I mean, in Toronto, in the last 8 years under Tory, everybody that was hired at the top in the city, the city manager, the 3 deputy managers, the head of finance, parks and recreation, transportation, the police, everybody was white. Everybody. Not one visible minority. In the city where more than half of us were born in another country, where more than half of the people are visible minorities, but then we don't say we're very quiet. No, we need to stop being politically correct. When I was doing my Canadian experience in Mississauga, one of the last things I did was a session for the top 120 people. That was 10 years ago. Of the top 120, there was one visible minority. Also in a city with more than half of the people are visible minorities. So how can technology help break some of these barriers? I think it's a big challenge, but in many cases, so far, I think that maybe we need to improve technology. Maybe we need to make technology more relevant to help solve some of these social issues. Because right now it has not been like, when I was running for mayor, I visited every neighborhood in Toronto. I never, ever heard one person tell me that they were having issues because of technology. or they were not getting jobs, or they were not getting housing, or they were not getting recreation programs for their children, or they were not. It never came up. So maybe one of the things that we need is how can we get technology to be more relevant to improve the quality of life of immigrants, to the integration of immigrants, as well as to the population as a whole. But I think that on the other hand, let's be very clear, but also there is such a irresponsible attitude from the media and from elected officials to blame immigrants for issues that have nothing to do with them. It's not about them. And we'll talk about housing later on. And then, oh, it's the immigrant, the immigrant. When it's negative, it's the immigrants. When it's positive, it's the city or the country or whatever. So I think that this social context of immigrants and technology has been touched. I mean, I like just one last example. Short. When you have speed cameras, well, the speed camera doesn't know if it's an immigrant or black or white or blue or whatever, then everybody gets tickets. When it's the police giving out tickets in Toronto, the visible minorities get overwhelmingly more tickets than the population. They get overwhelmingly more stop even just to ask for what are they doing in this area or whatever. So there's such a racial profiling. So when the immigrants, in addition of being immigrants, they are racial minorities and whatever, it becomes a big issue. So I think it's interwoven. Our social issues interwoven also with immigration and with technology. But I would welcome ways on how technology could become much more relevant to improve this quality of life of immigrants and of everybody.
Thank you for that. So Zushi, this is more because you do a lot of work in small communities. And that is one of the, the themes here. So the question is, what are the ways to attract, integrate, and retain newcomers in small communities across the country? And if you could also elaborate on the issues that they face and what exactly is needed. And here I am, who comes from Alberta. I know those communities quite well, but you know it almost the same way here in Ontario, and your work in Alberta. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you address these questions, paying more attention to the non-metropolitan areas or the non-traditional gateway areas. And I think that's really like something very pressing, especially in the context of Canada. We are a big country, but our population is relatively smaller. And also there's this uneven distribution of the population, especially when it comes to immigrant population. We have these traditional MTV cities as a gateways, Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto. And now we have like emerging gateways like Edmonton, Calgary, and Ottawa, and exceeding the population of 1 million people. But again, a lot of these smaller cities and communities across the country, from coast to coast to coast, what is our understanding of the lived experiences of newcomers in those smaller cities? And despite the regionalization policies from the federal government, having lots of proactive policies, such as the provincial nominee program or the rural pilot program to try to attract skilled workers and immigrants to those smaller cities. But the data still, the demographic data still tells us over 60% of the immigrants concentrating in the only 3 gateway cities. So recently, I have conducted a project to understand the social infrastructure, the policy structure, as well as immigrants' lived experiences in smaller cities across Canada. So in Canada, the federal government has established the so-called the LIPs, the local immigration partnerships across the country, and so far we have over 80 LIPs in Canada. So these partnerships are basically to consolidate local resources and build partnerships among community partners and stakeholders, and also bringing newcomers to the decision-making table. So the goal is to build synergies, build partnerships, and provide better services for newcomers. And that also depends on the leadership of the local municipalities as well as the local community stakeholders. Some of the LEAPs, they are led by the city. For example, the city of Hamilton, and they take the lead to establish the LEAPs. But the other LEAPs, they are basically initiated by local agencies, settlement agencies, and services. The other thing is I also look into the lived experiences of newcomers. There are pros and cons when it comes to living in a small cities, or when it comes to staying in a smaller place. The advantages could include the tranquil small town atmosphere, easy to access to everything within 10-minute drive. But the disadvantage is it's really auto-centric. In those places, you have to rely on your automobiles. But in many cases of newcomers, they not necessarily have they can afford a private vehicle. But then in those places, the disadvantage is there's a lack of transit system, for example. There's a lack of health services and amenities and cultural amenities. And some of the small towns, they don't even provide transit. It's basically you have to drive, or you have to rely on taxis, or the bus on demand. You can call the bus and then they send us a minibus to provide the service. Very inconvenient, but also some of the advantages the immigrants newcomers I interview, they talk about, relatively speaking, the job stability, the employment stability, housing affordability. But in some other places, we can observe the increasing housing price, and it has become less and less affordable, especially for newcomers. So with all these like pros and cons, and what would be the strategies? And when I talked to the LEAPS representatives, I collected a good sample size and pretty representing regional differences, etc., across the country. A lot of them, they talk about the regional collaboration, the importance of regional collaboration, because especially for rural communities, for small municipalities with less than 10,000 people, the small towns, small villages, they rely on these collaborations through their regional partners, and the different LEAPs in different rural areas, they collaborate together to come up with strategies to address the needs of newcomers, for example. The other thing is the municipality's leadership. Very important to have this, like, to build this welcome infrastructure. Unlike the US, and Kathy might be, you are the expert on the Welcoming America initiatives. And in the States, they have the welcoming communities, and basically it's the local municipal leadership is the key to enable this welcoming infrastructure. But here in Canada, the LEAPs, there are some challenges as well, because if we don't really, we can't enable the infrastructure, the welcoming infrastructure effectively in collaboration with municipalities. And there's many other missing targets. And it really requires this leadership from municipalities. But when it comes to immigrants, newcomers' experiences, and I use the photo voice to collect those stories. And what they talk about, okay, there's a lack of cultural representation. There's a lack of cultural amenities. And they don't feel like they are connected with the local community, especially in those communities predominantly with the predominantly homogeneous when it comes to demographics. And then when newcomers arrive, especially some of the small towns, when they open up the admissions to international students, for example, some of the small towns, and they suddenly, within a year, they have over 5,000 international students coming to town. And the local community, it was a shock to the local communities because they are not ready to see different skin colors, different faces, and they are not ready for this kind of differences. So for racialized newcomers, especially, they encounter racism, discrimination in the public space, on the street car, on the streets, and on the buses, in the shopping malls, etc. So how do we address that? And when I talk to the LIV's representatives, interesting thing is they prioritize opportunities, employment opportunities and housing services, for example. No disagreement with that. They are important considerations. But at the same time, they not really look into how to promote community inclusion, combating racism, for example, and the public awareness on discrimination and cultural diversity, etc. So that's not their priority. The priority is to focus on providing employment and jobs and housing, etc. So that is really like putting newcomers in a very difficult situation because the environment, the host environment is not very welcoming. And how do you combat that? And then that goes to the next point is, how can we actually support newcomers in those smaller cities without sufficient physical as well as social infrastructure? And also, how can we retain them? And how can we actually develop better welcoming infrastructure? When I'm talking to the people, why they stay in those small communities, they said if they, despite all the challenges in their life, in their career, in the face of racism and discrimination, they said if they can find opportunities to help others in a way to support others, and not only just newcomers, but other people in the community, so then they can take agency, they can participate fully in the civic life. That's the draw, the big draw for them to stay and continue to fight for justice. And also engage in civil life and have a better integration with the whole society, because it's a two-way street, two-way communication. It's not just put the honors on newcomers to adapt to this whole society, but we take agents, they take agency, they exercise the agency to change the status quo and to challenge the status quo. And they said that in that way, they develop this sense of belonging, sense of community, and they stay. And that's another thing that as planners and wearing this professional planner's hat and thinking about policy, thinking about building infrastructure, welcoming infrastructure, that's a really good learning. And what is the missing voices, and how can we understand better their lived experiences in those smaller cities?
Yeah, thank you, Sushi. Just on the positive note, I just wanted to say that there is a community in southern Alberta. It's called Lethbridge, and you may be familiar with it. It's slightly less than 100,000 people, and it is it's called the capital of Bhutan outside of Bhutan. There are like 8,000 Bhutanese in Lethbridge, and there are a number of reasons as to why they began to settle in that area. It's, you know, they felt like it's very similar to Bhutan. It's close to the Rockies. You can see the Rockies and the mountains from there. And the kind of employment and occupation they were engaged in, and the similar occupations exist in Lethbridge, resource-based, a lot of farming, and then things of that nature. So just adding to Zushi, your point as well. I just wanted to, at this point, do want to talk about housing. Oh, you want to add? Okay, just
Small
quick,
comment,
and then we'll go to
quick
housing.
on the small towns, because the reality is that, I mean, there's a comedian in the US called Bill Maher. And Bill Maher, they said, oh, why is it that people don't, why is it that the small towns people are living in the small communities? And they said, oh, simple, because people don't want to live there. That's the reality. Not only the immigrants, the local people don't want to live in the small communities. But because the quality of life is not good or bad because they are small or because they are big. The pandemic, and now we're talking about technology, gave a new life. They gave a new lifeline to the small communities. All of a sudden, when you need to commute maybe 1 day a week or 2 days a week, then you don't mind living 2 hours away to come in once. So it's a new lifeline. And this new lifeline, I think, is important that the small communities take advantage. But that it's important also that they realize that they're not good because they're small. That's not enough. When we're talking about the 15-minute cities in the cities, it's the same thing in the community, except that the 15-minute is the whole community. But it also needs to be walkable and bikeable, and needs to have trees and parks and activities and integration and life in the during the winter, all kinds of activities for young, for old, for everybody. So I think if the small communities that actually become really, really, really good places are going to thrive. I think this has been an amazing opportunity that just came up to the small community. But if they don't change and they continue being like they are just because they think that being small is enough, I think eventually they're going to disappear. And the reality, why do people come to live in the cities? Because they find better quality of life in the cities. In the cities, there's better health and better education and better parks and better universities and better theater and better all this. So they end up coming. It's not because they are dumb. All over the world, they end up coming. But I do think that the hybrid work has given a magnificent new lifeline to small communities where they could really become great places for everyone, and including immigrants. Oh, and one bold idea for immigrants. What if the federal government created an immigrant program that a work permit for 4 years in all the towns wherever they want? We want dentists here, we want architects here, we want carpenters here. Okay, we'll give you a 4-year work permit in that community with the guarantee that after 4 years, if you live there and your children go to school there and whatever, we'll give you automatically, we give you the residence. All of a sudden, there would be many people that would go, and then they would know from the start that they're coming to us. After 4 years, they will have built a lot of networks and friends, and their children and youth will have boyfriends and girlfriends, and they will be with the neighbors and whatever. After having lived 4 years in a small community, there will be so many times that it will be very unlikely that they will move back, they will move somewhere else. But they need to have that incentive. Work permit in a specific community with a guarantee of residence after 4 years.
Thank you for that, Gil. Just wanted to add that one of the issues that rural areas are facing, at least in Alberta and other provinces, is access to broadband. So they all have to buy, Starlink and things of that in nature to do the remote work, Gil, you were talking about. The other thing I wanted to add, Alberta does have a program such as what you just mentioned, and it's bringing a lot of nurses and doctors who go and work in rural areas. And I know a ton of them, they do, because it's for 3 or 4 years, and they all then move back to Edmonton and Calgary because they're not, the kids have grown up now, they have to go to high school, hockey, whatever, and so that's the problem. Okay, so I think we have only 5 minutes, and Bertie just told me, I do want to touch upon housing, and Gil, housing. So if you could talk a little bit about the housing crisis, housing challenges to new Canadian, and it's if you look at the media, it's basically immigrants, newcomers, immigration is being blamed for the current housing crisis. So if you could speak to that, that'll be fantastic.
I think it's shameful how elected officials and the media have been blaming immigrants for the housing crisis, when the immigrants have nothing to do with the housing crisis. The issue is that there has not been good communication between the federal government, the provincial governments, and the municipal governments to solve this issue. For example, in Toronto, up until last year, over 80% of the land was for single-family housing, and they would not allow rooming houses. So when you have a lot of students and you have a house, maybe people are empty nesters and they want to age in place, they have a house that is too big and too expensive, they would like to rent rooms to students. That was illegal. That was illegal in 80% of Toronto. And actually, it's still legal in 80% of all of GTHA. If you allow that, Then they're doing many illegal. So then what happens? You get 14 students in one house with 2 restrooms and it's totally unhealthy and whatever. Why don't they complain? Because it's illegal, so they're gonna be kicked out. But if this was legal, you could have thousands of houses that would incorporate 1 or 2 students, and that would be a huge issue to solve. The other thing is that if we had coordinated the housing policy, the immigration policy at the federal level with the housing and with the municipal, then a lot of this would be solved. So with or without, for example, the immigrants, now we're blaming the students. Well, without immigrant students, most of the colleges, including the universities like TMU, would practically disappear. They've been really having a huge financial support thanks to the immigrants, because the immigrants pay much higher tuition. Also, the immigrants could be amazing from the point of view of the immigration policy of the country, because these people that are going to live here for 2 or 4 years, adapt to the culture and the food and the language and the winters and everything. So this could be very, very positive. But I do think, for example, now, finally, we have one federal minister of housing that is amazing. In the last year, he has done more for housing than all of the ministers at the federal level and provincial level in the last 2 years. And finally, housing is moving forward. And I think that if we had the same, a change of minister of immigration and also had a doer like this one in housing. Look, same prime minister, same political parties, just change the person. You get someone with vision and doing, and things happen. And I think that it would, but I do think that we need to move much faster in housing, such as allowing people to subdivide their homes. That would open up also a lot of homes. We would allow as of right to densify the corridors, the arterial corridors. So I do think that the housing crisis, 1, is not because of the immigrants, and it's shameful to blame it on the immigrants. 2, that we need to solve it, and I think that we're moving in that direction. But also that, and technology could help a lot in providing information and helping and educating. But at the same time, we I not only need to solve the housing crisis, but we are creating the cities for the next 200 or 300 years. So we need to create really good cities, not just go crazy and do some monster cities where people decades from now are gonna blame us. But so it's not the immigrants, but of course it needs to be solved.
Well said, Gail. So I think we are at a time when we want to open it up for questions from the audience here. So if I see, oh gosh, yeah, oh, good. This is all good. And we have, I think, questions coming from the virtual medium as well. So just few things I would say. When you ask a question, please state your name, the organization where you're from, and then state your question. You can direct your question to a panelist or to the entire panel. So, well, okay, I see Murray right there. Eager to ask a question. Go ahead.
As always. So thank you so much for a really interesting panel. I guess because the panel moved from cities to services to immigrants to experiences of social connection in cities and in smaller cities and all of that. So it was great having all of this overview. This is not a question for one person, but maybe 2 of you could try to think about how to answer. One of the questions we have through Bridging Divides is also how do you, so I'm taking the assumption that immigrants are pretty good at digital things. But one of the things that's happening with all these technologies, for example, preparing pre-arrival and identifying a map and knowing where to go and all of that, is that you actually lose a lot of the human connections when you arrive. So a lot of the integration process and delivery of in-person integration services was allowing people to build social capital and a lot of soft skill that are so important in feeling okay in a society and in adapting to a society. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that as well, as we're moving to, both in large cities and in small cities, as we're moving to a more digital way of doing integration, how then does that affect the acquisition and the experience of those soft skills?
So maybe we'll take
2 or 3 questions because I did see a whole bunch of hands. So I see Yasmin there. Maybe Yasmin, and then I'll come to you, sir, in a minute. Yes.
Okay, I'm Yasmin Abuleben from the University of Alberta. Like Maria, I want to just thank the panel for the excellent discussion. One thing I'd observe is that I think throughout this discussion, there's been a kind of assumption that integration is something that immigrants are supposed to do. However, Canada's understanding of integration going back 20 or 30 years was that integration is a two-way street, which means that immigrants, have to adapt to a new society, but the society itself has to change and shift, and that's how you get inclusion. And so, like Marie, I maybe ask one or two of the panelists to just reflect on how is technology going to help Canada adopt, Canadians that are born in Canada adopt. And I appreciated also Jill's comments about racism and the reality of racism. And so another way of thinking about this is how can technology make people that are racist less racist?
Okay, thanks.
Yasmin, so,
Yes, sir.
My name is Mehdi Rizvi. I am a former member of the Community Editorial Board of the Toronto Star. Currently, I write for Rebel Canada. My question is to Gil, founder of the Cities for Everyone. It's a very simple question. I would say not only racial profiling is dangerous for us, but also the political conflicts around the world are affecting Canadian national unity. That we have also seen in our university campuses recently. We have two kinds of relationships with all other human beings. Either we are brethren in faith or we are brethren in humanity. And I believe the later relation is a stronger relation. We are all brethren in humanity. Now my question is, how technology can educate all Canadians, including incoming immigrants and the recent immigrants in this country, to open up their arms and hearts to accept the differences with grace and love and live in peace.
Okay, very good. Okay,
panelists, so 3 questions. They were all technology related, both benefits and the risks. So just repeating and getting the essence of the questions. Technology could lead to loss of social capital, that human connection that the integration provides. But Yasmin then questioned that, well, why do immigrants have to integrate? Should be two-way street. And if so, then what's the role of technology? And the last one was about technology and how could educate people to live in peace. So you could see a lot of stuff there. So whoever wants to go first, and I see Zushi is very eager to.
Yes, eager to answer the questions, to have the conversation again. Yes, I think that's a great question about like, how do we support building more meaningful human connections. So when you're right, when a lot of newcomers arriving in this digital age, they come with the digital literacy, but also we don't forget there are a large group of people like the families and the seniors and the undocumented migrants and asylum seekers, and not necessarily they have these literacy skills, right? So just keep that in mind as a context. And also they don't, like some of them, to protect their privacy, they refuse to use technology because it's all the informal network and for their own, the protection of their safety. And so like put that in context as well. But definitely how to engage newcomers to promote this kind of like human connection, human social interaction. I found that in my studies of, in my photo voice studies, and I found newcomers are really creative. They actually long for this kind of real life connections, because I did the research during the COVID time. And a lot of them, like we had to do the interviews and everything online, but they talk about the spaces they identify, whether or not it's from a hiking trail where they left a mark on the rocks and to send a very hopeful message to others, or the way that they try to find spaces to connect, like the so-called third place theory, right? The places outside of your home and work, and there's a public space, the shared spaces, the community spaces. And they're really creative to identify those spots, right? Whether it's a badminton club, they connect with people from different countries, or they use a city square to get the coffee, to build that connection with their home. Oh, the Tim Hortons coffee, for some reason, it actually connects them with the memory of the home coffee, something like that, right? They identify those third places, and even like a private shopping mall or a small suburban plaza. They find those spaces to create, but also there are a lot of informal networks that are not really formally recognized by authorities or by professionals, by planners and policymakers. So how do we preserve those spaces? Very important. Informal spaces, for example, in Scarborough and many suburban malls, you can find lots of Chinese, Asian seniors who practice Tai Chi and fan dance in those spaces to build their community, right? So important, so critical. But recently in Vancouver, there was a mall, like the management office, they rejected the users of that space. And they basically, the senior immigrants, they got kicked out, right? That is really like a big, really harmful action. And how do we preserve those places? And even like, for example, like the temporary infrastructure, a market, a free market in the community where newcomers, they can share their cultural foods and cultural goods and to build connection. So preserving those spaces is important, but also I want to get to the next point about, the next question about the, technology, right? Like Jeffrey mentioned, there are biases in the data, right? So much so we want to develop the technology to map out those like data, the big data. We are missing something. The informal networks, the informal spaces, the third places that communities, they develop, they self-develop, right? And they nurture those spaces. How can we actually support it? When the data shows beautifully, like the Canadian Urban Institute, they developed a Main Street database from coast to coast to coast, and large and small communities, they show those Main Street businesses. But what about the informal immigrant businesses that are not captured, right? So that's how CUI, the institute, they collaborated with our school, and we developed a project to look into the informal immigrant entrepreneurship infrastructure in those neighborhoods, right? In the suburbs and in the city, and they got displaced, and they developed this kind of like a temporary markets, for example. How do they continue building this informal social infrastructure and third places? And data can be biased. And we talk about digital feminism. We talk about data justice. How do we recognize the missing data? So I better stop here.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that there are lots of questions, and I know each and every panelist is just eager to answer. So if you could be, and I want to give chance to all of you. So Kathy, Gil, and then Jeffrey. But if you could be precise, because I know there will be another round of questions, coming from Jeremy as well. So Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, I think, first of all, I agree with your question about the two-way street, because we used to use the word assimilation, right? A lot, probably 20 years ago. And that's more when we talk about how immigrants need to assimilate into a more mainstream kind of lifestyle and everything. Whereas now we talk about integration, which I think by the change of word already, I think talks about this is not just kind of one way or one dimensional kind of efforts and change. Touch upon with what Zhixi was saying, I just want to give an example of how some of these informal spaces become virtual spaces. So in Atlanta, where Georgia State University is, there are lots of immigrant communities, immigrant concentrated communities. And one notable example is this kind of a relatively busy road called Beaufort Highway, which I think some of you might heard about. It becomes an interesting case of a suburban commercial development that's different from what used to be these Chinatowns, Little Italys, that's more kind of a ethnic enclave kind of idea. So it's a strip of commercial roads that has lots of multi-ethnic. It's not just from one place. It's actually from maybe 10, 20 countries, restaurants and offices, retail spaces lined along this Buford Highway. So in certain spots of Buford Highway, there used to be these spaces where immigrant workers, they would not, if they look for a job, especially the construction, the manual work kind of job, they do not go to employment intermediaries. They go to this space, kind of a little corner in front of a gas station, and they just wait there. So whoever is looking for work, they will just go there and they wait there. And whoever needs some work, say, I need my roof down today, or if I need to mow the lawn today, right? If you want to fix something today at home, you go there and then you talk to the people. So it's a very direct way of kind of, offering labor and finding work. So that's kind of what used to be this kind of a physical space. And now you realize that with technology and all these advancements, I do some work on platform work and on-demand work, these sorts of things through Uber Eats. But Thumbtack, right, has really taken space of these real spaces that now you need some work done that you don't, house cleaning, you don't go to this Buford Highway Square anymore. You actually go directly to Thumbtack and you say, okay, now I need somebody to clean the house, right? To move out cleaning and things like that. So I think that's one example of, it's hard to say which one is more efficient because, on the virtual space of Thumbtack and other places, you actually do have lots of information, right? You get to see several different offers. And also you actually, the workers, they also kind of can choose from different potential employers and to do the exact tasks that they need. But I think what I realized after using that service several times is that you're not always talking to the workers themselves. Usually these are people who are more digitally capable, right? They speak English or they can at least type in English and they type with you. But then when you get in touch with them, they actually have other workers that they contract out. So in other words, I think it creates probably a middle layer where people who are more digitally capable and who can navigate this virtual space, and then they become the people who connect, right, between the potential, people who need the work and the people who do the work. So I think technology actually with the platform work can potentially ease some of the barriers, language barriers, some of these barriers, but at the same time, it creates its own issues of, who's being included and who's not, and what would be the implications for the people who actually do the work, but who's not as kind of skillful in the digital spaces.
Yeah,
Gil?
I think that we need to first be honest and realize that we are the most diverse city and the most diverse country in the world, but not the most integrated. We are not the most integrated. So that we work on it. If we are not aware of that is a huge problem, then we don't work on it. I hope that this group will find ways how technology can make it better, because unfortunately I see technology making it worse. Because with technology, we're becoming more and more narrow-minded. When I used to read the newspaper in print copy, maybe I found a title of something interesting about, cricket tournament in New Zealand and this thing. And then maybe the title or the photo caught my attention and I will read through that article. But electronically, that article would never pop up in my screen. I would have 1,000 things pop up before that one. So we become much more narrow-minded. We end up reading the columnists that pop up are the columnists that have similar political trends. The sports that come up is the sports that are similar and more. So we end up seeing less and less and less diverse. And that, I think, that is a huge problem. This morning, I read a very interesting article in the New York Times from technology of someone that created through AI 4 friends. Different. One is a good-looking woman, sexy, sensual. The other one is a genius, whatever. And now they are his 4 friends, And those are the ones he's interacting with. And maybe all of that is also causing less and less people going out. The other day, someone was saying that the highlight of her day was at 10 o'clock when she would go downstairs to Starbucks and line up for coffee and talk to people. And she said, now people don't go to Starbucks and they don't talk to anybody. They pre-order, they come in, they are chatting, they don't even say thank you to the person, to the cashier, and then they leave. So we are missing a lot of that personal contact. So I think that we need to realize that the lack of integration is a huge problem. The number one public health issue today is loneliness in the US and in Canada. And I think that we need to put a lot of effort in creating programs for people to see each other. It's not just the infrastructure. It's not just doing the walking path. We need to do walking groups. We need to do knitting groups, knitting in the parks. We need to do dancing with strangers in the parks. We need programs so that people will get to see each other. And of course, what does it impact with immigrants? Because also if we, in some of these programs are about music from certain parts of the country. We're going to do it from salsa from Latin America, or we're going to do fashion from India, or we're going to do whatever. Then it helps the integration that you were saying, not only that, on both ways. People that are interested in the Indian food, but also the Indian community interested in the others. But I think we urgently need a lot of investment in programs. It's hardware, but also we need software. We need infrastructure, but we need programs. And that is, and unfortunately, I think that technology is pushing us to be more narrow-minded and less people contact, and it is concerning.
So Jeffrey.
I just want to reinforce what the others have said, but try to sort of put a philosophical spin on it. I think we have to be very careful about techno-solutionism. We have to be very careful when we ask questions like, how can technology solve X? And there's two things that we need to be willing to do. We need to be able to say, no, it can't. But another way to think of it is to expand our idea of what is technology. When I moved to Alberta, the single most important integration technology for me was long winter underwear. I mean, and we've been hearing about spaces. Those are technologies. We've been hearing we need to expand our idea to, you know, classrooms, teachers. There's all sorts of bureaucracies can be a technology, if you will. Jacques Ellul sort of argues that that's the beginning of the technological society. So we need to be able to say no, and we need to be able to open our minds to a much different type, to a much broader range of things for exactly the reasons of alienation. I mean, there's now more and more research coming out. Now I want to address Yasmin's question. So, which was how, you know, and I think there was the gentleman in the back, the question. So that, you know, if we start asking how can we overcome some of the racism or something like that? I actually ran a project trying to develop an interface to get dialogue happening around COVID. And I had to admit, we sort of failed. Bruno Latour actually asked a bunch of designers a question about how can we create dialogical interfaces? But so often the visualizations, the data visualization systems we have come from a tradition of a God's eye view. A visualization system should, in some sense, make the phenomena make it look like you have this omniscient view of it. And that does not encourage a sort of parallax view where you see that, oh, there's different sides to it. There isn't one answer, and we need to start having a dialogue. It's very hard to do those. And I think our systems, our platforms, our infrastructure is biased towards a certain approach of we get lots of data and we'll get answers and then we get solutions. It's a sort of engineering approach. And sometimes we might have to admit that we're not going to have a great visualization for this. And you mentioned data feminism. I mean, I would say that they address this in much more detail and in you know, the different chapters, how data science has problems itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So I do not want to alienate folks online. So Jeremy, what's the question? If you could just state that.
Is it working? Yeah. So we have 3 questions online. So the first question that we have is for Jussi. It's on the local integration partnerships. It was, could you please explain for which types of newcomers it's working? Is it for families or for refugees? And is there an attempt to change the difficult public transport situation? Then we had a second question, which I think is more for Jeffrey, and which is, given that Canada's settlement and integration sector takes on grants and contribution structure with the government as the funder and non-profit organizations as service deliverers, who has the responsibility to ensure that technology and AI is deployed in a safe way to support newcomer integration? Should it be shared responsibility, especially considering that many regulatory framework on AI and privacy do not extend to nonprofit organizations? And then following up on this question, we had a third question emphasizing the challenges that immigrant serving organizations face when it comes to data privacy and security to newcomer data. And so building on this question, what thoughts does Jeffrey have on how the service delivery side of the sector can and should move forward to meet the challenges?
Okay. So I think the first
One
one
is for Zushi, you brought up the idea of LIP, and then the other 2 questions for Jeffrey, you. Okay, we'll repeat that question.
Oh, yes, about the LIPS. They are not, because LIPS is funded by the federal government. So their mandate is to support those services towards immigrants and refugees. So under this funding structure, well, by the way, just to clarify, LIPS, they don't provide services per se. They are basically connecting with service providers, agencies, and settlement workers and other major community stakeholders together to consolidate resources and to build synergies and partnerships. So, but then their mandate is to target immigrants and refugees. And there are other types of newcomers, such as temporary foreign workers, international students, but under their mandate, they don't have any specific programs and support for those people. However, the LIPS have been advocating for broadening their service targets and programs and initiatives, because especially during the pandemic time, there are lots of international students, they got trapped, or temporary foreign workers, they got trapped. They couldn't go back home, but then they don't have any support here as well. So some of the LIPS, they are really like mindful of the needs of these newcomers. They open the door and try to support them and link to some of the necessary services for these temporary migrants. So this is something in working. The other thing I want to say is a little bit about the indigenous newcomer relations. It's not really, right now, it's not the priority of the LIPS, but there are certain initiatives for some of the more proactive LIPS. They are emphasizing on how to engage newcomers in towards reconciliation. So through the connection with the indigenous partners, with the communities, and newcomers during their first arrival, they got educated. They are connected with indigenous communities to really understand the indigenous history of the land and how they can contribute to reconciliation and respectfully settle in this land. And so there's a lot coming.
Thanks,
Okay. So Jeffrey, and Jeremy, you could correct me. So the 2 questions were more about who is responsible for responsible AI, and the other one was to do with data privacy and service delivery and the use of AI, if I'm not wrong. Did I say it correctly, Jeremy? Is that what the essence? Okay.
Well, I'm going to start by saying I think, and I'm addressing Anna right now. I think one of the responsibilities that we have given this project is to start building to build materials, resources, training, and be available to help the service sector think through the issues of, not tell them what to do, but think through and begin to connect to build the networks of knowledge that allow them to understand how responsibility is changing as the tools distribute responsibility differently. So I think this is an opportunity is a challenge to us. We have the scale, we have the knowledge, we have the connections to be able to make a difference, and that's what I would like research to be able to do. Now I'm going to step back and now go way up into the sort of philosophical clouds here. So responsible AI. The premise of responsible AI, and that's one approach to sort of thinking through the ethics of AI. The premise starts with a hinge statement, which you find in all sorts of documents. The hinge statement is something like this. It goes, AI has great potential, or AI is bound to happen. It's train coming down, but there could be ethical problems, and therefore we have to figure out how to do it responsibly. So right there are assumptions in the rhetoric of responsible AI. That one assumption is that it's going to happen, and we can't say no. And I tried to, in the earlier question, I think we need to reacquire the ability to say no or no to AI in certain situations, to be able to ask that question. Does it have to be done with AI? Or would a decision tree work better, or a statistical approach? But the second thing is, and I think Virginia Digham, who talks about this, is absolutely right. These technologies change the allocation of responsibility. So if I can give an example, when the Uber car hit the bicyclist in the dark in Tempe, Arizona. So it was running, Uber was test driving their self-driving car system. They had an engineer in the seat. It hit a bicyclist in the dark. The system recognized that it didn't recognize what this funny thing was crossing the road. Too late for the engineer. I don't even know if she was called an engineer, but anyway, the person sitting there to respond. In addition, it seems like the person was put into a job where they had to sit there, not doing anything, but be able to intervene at the very last moment. So what happens when you give someone a job where they do absolutely nothing for hours on end and then have to wake up and intervene? Well, it turns out she was watching television on her lap. She was watching a reality show on her lap. So even had she been looking forward, she wasn't looking forward. So we have this question, and we now have legal precedents of who was responsible. Was it the person sitting in the car, to my mind, put into a situation where she was not really given meaningful human control? Uber could say that there was a human in the loop, but the human was not put into the loop with the sort of training, the preparation, and the interface such that she could make a meaningful decision in the fraction of a second she had before, when all of a sudden it was a woman with a bicycle jaywalking on a dark road. It wasn't even a city. It was, so was she responsible? And in fact, the system seems to have decided she was. The transportation agency decided that Uber was not responsible. I think they're wrong. I think they created a moral buffer. They created a situation where there was a human in the loop, and that gave them a sort of ethical buffer to say it's not our fault. Or was it the platform? Because Uber was probably building on an existing foundation model of some sort or another. Actually, I don't know that, but many of the systems we now use, there's these layers. So we have to start rethinking responsibility. And so that question is an absolutely appropriate one right now, because it's probably going to be the frontline workers, the service organizations that get blamed. It's not going to be Google, or even if Google is blamed, they're going to have the lawyers in a way that a small outfit trying to help people using AI is not going to have. And back to what bridging divides can do. We can try to bridge the divides from the literature, the ethical thinking, and the service organizations that need the applied ethics. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that was very good, Jeff. So we had past 11 o'clock. I know you had tons of questions, but you can always approach our panelists after 11 o'clock. They will be around. I know Jeff is leaving late in the evening, but he'll be here this afternoon. But just wanted to say, let's give our panelists a round of applause.